Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. It's so great to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us for Face-to-Face 2023's virtual conference kickoff. My name is Kimberly Olson. I use she, her pronouns. I am a pale-skinned white woman wearing clear framed glasses. I have sort of wavy brown hair, and I'm wearing a forest green turtleneck up against a white wall background with a piece of wooden art behind me. And we are so honored to have you all join us as we celebrate and kick off our 30th anniversary of Face-to-Face. This is Looking Ahead, Arts Education in the Next 30 Years. For those of you that might be new to the Roundtable, we are a grassroots service organization working to improve and advance the state of arts ed through professional development workshops, advocacy, online resources, and platforms to connect the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting via an online platform, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on unceded lands. Manhattan, or the place that is widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We'd like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities which have helped build the city that we know today. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, we'd like to lift up some contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we can all support and learn from as well. Perfect. And I see you'll find those in the chat. Also, you may have seen our chat was at first disabled. It is now active. Please introduce yourself. We'd love to see where folks are tuning in from today. I myself am calling in from Long Island City. For those organizations that we shared, we encourage you to learn more about those organizations, support them with donations if possible, and also for you to share any resources or organizations in the chat that you might like to highlight. Thank you so much. Now, first, a huge thank you to our conference sponsors. We are so grateful to all of the organizations on this screen for helping to make Face-to-Face, our 30th one, possible this year. And in particular, this session has been brought to you by Dance Education Laboratory, or DEL, and Disney. So a huge thank you to DEL at 92NY and to Disney Theatrical Group. Now, some quick webinar reminders before I turn things over to our board co-chair, Gary Padmore, to offer some welcome on behalf of the Roundtable's Board of Directors. So this webinar, as you may have seen, includes live ASL interpretation as well as automatic closed captioning via Zoom. To activate the captions, please navigate to your toolbar, click Show Captions. This feature also might be located under the More button on your toolbar. Now, please note this session is being recorded and will be made available to registrants in a follow-up email, as well as on our YouTube channel. As you may have seen, this is a Zoom webinar, so you can see us, but unfortunately we can't see or hear you. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists. We have saved time at the end of our call to answer some of your questions. Otherwise, please feel free to use the chat to connect with others and also to contact either myself or Kinsey Keck there if you need any additional help. Now, I'm humbled to be in the presence of such incredible leaders. I'm going to turn it over now to one such leader who I have the pleasure of working with at the Roundtable, Gary Padmore, who is the Vice President of Education and Community Engagement at the New York Philharmonic, as well as our board co-chair, to offer some remarks. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone. As Kim shared, I'm Gary Padmore, the Vice President of Education and Community Engagement at the New York Philharmonic, and I have the privilege and honor of being co-chair of the board of the Arts and Education Roundtable. Before I start with the welcome, I wanted to just give a huge props to Kim, Kinsey, Alex, and the Roundtable staff for making this such a wonderful hybrid event for the Roundtable community. So thank you for that. And just wanted to also mention that I guess this year makes about 20 years that I've been in this field, starting as a teaching artist and now, of course, as an administrator. And the Roundtable community over the past 30 years has certainly been a huge part of my growth as an individual. And so wherever this is for you all, whether this is your first year as a teaching artist or administrator, or whether this is your 30th year being a part of this community, I do hope that you'll be able to really take away some gems, especially from this conversation, but also think collectively about how we can use this work to advance and deepen our impact in this field over the next 30 years, because obviously this work is continuing as part of our journey. And I'm so grateful for all of the people who I've learned from during this time in the roundtable, including many of the folks that are on this panel later on. And so with that, I'll pass it over to my wonderful colleague and fellow board member, Asari Beale. Enjoy.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Kim. As Gary shared, my name is Asari Beale. I am a brown-skinned Black woman with short curly hair. I'm wearing a green turtleneck, glasses, and a cardigan in front of a Black background. In addition to being the Executive Director of Teachers and Writers Collaborative, I am a proud member of the Arts and Education Roundtable. And I can't express how grateful I am to the Roundtable, to Kim and the team there, for all the work that they do on behalf of the field, helping to make sure that arts education, high quality arts education, is accessible to New Yorkers. So thank you for all that you do. With so much uncertainty in the world, it's hard to imagine what the field of arts education will be like in 30 years. But I believe it's necessary for us to imagine, because the stronger vision that we have for the future, the more effectively we can work towards it. With that said, we've got a wonderful panel today to talk about the vision for the future, what we want to see the arts education like in the future, and what we have to do now to create that future. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists and then invite them to share a bit about themselves, about their work, and their vision for the future. After that, we'll have a bit of a conversation among ourselves, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. You have the ability to share any questions that you have using the Q&A feature in Zoom that is at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any trouble with that, you can also share a question in the chat, and someone will be able to move that to the Q&A area for us to address following the conversation. And so with that said, I'll go ahead and introduce our fantastic panel today. So first we have Summer Dawn. Summer is the founder and director of In Full Color. Next, Dr. Francis Lucerna, the co-founder and artistic director and president of El Puente. And finally, Michael Wiggins, a fellow board member with me on the Arts and Education Roundtable, and the Director of Education at Little Island at Pier 55. So let's start with Summer. Summer, please tell us a bit more about yourself and your work and share your vision with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Asari. So hi everyone, my name is Summer. Pronouns are she, her. I'm an Asian Hispanic woman. I'm wearing a velvety shirt today that suggests a past as interest in Gothic fashion and girly fashion. I have hoop earrings that call my Jersey City, New Jersey roots to the surface. And I am in my private space in my office today. So I have a little PowerPoint presentation because I'm a little extra. I like to be like that. So welcome to my PowerPoint presentation, looking ahead. I'm so excited to be here. Here's a little bit about me. So I am a teaching artist. I'm going to post my bio in the chat as well. Is there a way that I can put that in the chat? Let me see. Well, I'll put it in the chat, and I know People will figure it out. Oh, it's not working. That's okay. So I am a theater teaching artist. I also work in literary arts. I work in New Jersey and New York, everything from pre-K to 12. I work for Lincoln Center Theater, Young Audiences, and Storytelling Arts. As a student, I grew up very poor in an abusive home, and I moved a lot. I talked too much in class, but I did well academically. I grew up in diverse environments surrounded by Black and Brown people and culture. I've been in well-funded schools and under-resourced schools. So I see myself in a lot of the people I teach today. I'm also the founder and director of In Full Color. We're an organization that empowers women of color and other BIPOC of marginalized genders through education and the arts. So this includes Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, Middle Eastern, Arab, Indigenous folks, queer, trans, disabled folks. We currently serve over 300 artists across mostly North America, and our educational work includes partnerships with libraries, high schools, community centers, and universities. Here's some photos from our previous work. This is Rukaya Bluford performing a poem about growing up and realizing the oppressions women face. This was the show opener, and I really wanted it to be a display of kinship, unity, and radical diversity. So that's the entire cast of the show crossing behind her. This was 2018's opener. It was actually completely silent. Each person came out one by one, and they took a knee or they held up the Black Power fist. And then we just stared at the audience for a minute. For us, this is the key to what we believe. Art creates empathy. When you listen to a person tell their story, you understand them better, you know where they're coming from and how they feel, and empathy creates change. As you understand someone, you realize their needs, and in the case of women of color, the intersectional injustice they face. So I'm a woman of color, but I only know my experience. Through this work, I've learned so much about South Asian identity, Muslim traditions, the struggles of trans women. I've adopted all of these people's causes, and I fight for them and beside them. And these tenets are also critical to my work in the classroom. So I invite you to use the sharpest end of your imagination to dissect the problems we face today and to carve out solutions that currently seem impossible. 30 years ago, no one could have imagined we'd have a calculator everywhere we go in our pockets. So this is my manifestation. I'll be sharing two big ideas today that use arts as an anchor, but that are critical for core content teachers as well. Social emotional learning, becoming social emotional teaching. In communities where students and teachers are stressed, I see a lot of tap out behaviors, right? Can I go get water? Can I use the restroom? And often we invalidate these student needs, telling them the correct time for them to be thirsty has passed. We teach them to not listen to their bodies, or worse, that other people control their bodies. We say the student is faking, he just wants to get out of class. Recognizing that the actual need is emotional or psychological, but choosing not to honor it. A student should not need to cloak their emotional needs to try meeting them. So I envision a space where students can sit, stew, stim, draw, eat healthy snacks, hydrate, listen to music, move their bodies, write out their feelings at a pace that is led by them. A space activated by teaching artists, sharing artistic content with SEL skills. Lessons on restorative justice, conflict resolution, community activism, nutrition, taking care of our bodies, affirming queer students. This would be a new sustainable career possibility for arts educators who are already so often the mental and emotional health lifeline for young people in schools. And they could work in tandem with mental health professionals. Now, would children miss traditional class if they choose to go to this center? Maybe. But if they were still in that classroom, would they be truly engaged? As adults, when we bleed, we stop what we're doing, wash our hands, and put on a Band-Aid. Our students tell us every day that they are bleeding, and we tell them to suck it up. Teaching artists can create safe, nurturing spaces for students to heal themselves and grow. My other big idea is just more of what we're already doing, right? Arts educators, but other teachers can use this in their work more as well. So many of my students have homeroom teachers that characterize them as disruptive. often these are Black and brown kids. And sometimes they will talk while I'm talking, stand up, shout out answers. Being familiar with Black and brown cultures, I recognize these behaviors as engaged learning, not disruption. These are wildly intelligent children who are bored by the traditional pace of teaching and they want to be actively involved. Why do we look at them demonstrating activated learning and tell them and their families that something is wrong? Our expectation of what an engaged student does or looks like is rooted in white supremacy culture, as well as military, capitalist, and industrialist standards. We want students to be still and quiet, always staying on pace with the teacher's teaching style. We say sit straight, as if spinal curvature clogs your ears. We stamp out original thought. We tell students, no, you're wrong, without asking them, why did you think that? We spend more time teaching them to quote or cite the works of others than we do teaching them to create original ideas of their own. If you want to create a culturally responsive classroom, you can't just do it by reciting I Have a Dream in February. You also have to include Black and brown ways of teaching and thinking. And so many of these ways are arts activated. So some ways to start right now, allowing students to read together in chorus or pairs, gamifying your lessons. Look up those theater games. You can use them for your core content as well. Allowing students to lead discussion, asking more abstract questions and asking for abstract answers. Changing the ask from be quiet to be engaged, or give others space to talk and yourself space to listen. Let them respond kinesthetically. If you think the answer is A, wiggle your arms. If you think it's B, stomp your feet. Bring in bean bags, ottomans. Allow for more than one right answer. Give partial credit. Recognize and counter when you're placing expectations on them from white supremacy culture. The veneration of the written word, perfectionism, stillness, quiet, order. If these ideas resonated with you, please connect with me and in full color. I'm excited to be in dialogue with these other incredible educators on the line. Our contact information is right here. And also, it happens to be our fundraising month. We're raising funds to pay 8 to 12 BIPOC artists in the in-person return of our annual main stage show. So you can join us in Jersey City, New Jersey on April 15th, or you can make a tax-deductible donation in any amount online. And we also have raffle prizes by BIPOC artists that you don't even have to be present or local to win. Thank you so much, everyone. I can't wait to delve deeper with y'all today.
Thank you, Summer. That was really great. I especially love the ideas about restorative justice. Fantastic. So now I'd like to turn to Dr. Frances Lucerna. Frances, please share with us a bit about your work and about your vision for the future.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled and honored to be part of this kickoff panel for the 30th anniversary celebration of Face to Face. My name is Frances Lucerna. I am a brown-skinned Asian Latina woman with long brown hair. I'm wearing red glasses, silver earrings, a black shirt, and a purple scarf. And I am framed in my background by a shot of a mural that our public art team did that depicts images of indigenous deities. I am the co-founder, president, and artistic director of El Puente. El Puente is a community-based arts-focused organization that's dedicated to human rights and social justice and inspiring and nurturing leaders for peace and justice. We also promote community-led campaigns and movements for the liberation of oppressed communities. Here in Brooklyn, where we are located in the communities of Williamsburg and Brooklyn, and since 2013 in Puerto Rico, where we had an island-wide climate justice movement. My own background is I was born and raised in Williamsburg. My background is as a dancer and also an educator. And I have to say that I am feel so blessed to have been able to serve my community for these past 40 years as part of the Puente journey. I am going to read my vision statement, and in the statement, probably we'll talk more about it, Puente, so that I can honor the time that I've been given. So as I tried to wrap my head around a vision for 2053, I found myself reflecting on the time we all are in right now, still reeling, healing, and struggling from the unimaginable reality we all experienced as a global community in the pandemic, and the daunting challenges we face in these deeply uncertain, divisive, and disturbing times to create a more safe, just, and compassionate world going forward. There are many painful yet profound lessons, insights, and truths that we gained from the trauma we lived and the everyday heroism we witnessed by not only frontline workers, but also communities who rose up and came together to provide critical aid, support, resources, services, comfort, and hope for one another. An inspiring testimony not only to the power of the human spirit, but most importantly, the undeniable importance of radical, resilient, and responsive community organizations and networks that both serve and empower their people to exercise their right to self-determination, particularly for disenfranchised communities that continue to be severely impacted by historical inequities. For over 40 years at Puente, Spanish for the Bridge has been building community bridges and supporting community-led historic movements for social justice and determination through arts and culture, education, health and wellness, and environmental justice. We have and continue to be anchored by our mission to inspire and nurture leaders for peace and justice. Arts, culture, and the creative process have been central in our holistic leadership development process with young people and adults, as well as powerful tools for community building, education, visioning, organizing, and sustainable transformation. Through our pre-professional arts training programs, hundreds and perhaps thousands now throughout the years of young people in our communities have had the opportunity to receive free quality instruction and one-on-one mentoring in the visual and performing arts. Arts and culture integration has been a cornerstone of our public high school, the El Puente Academy for Peace and Justice. It's the foundation for the Academy's development and facilitation of culturally responsive curriculum, social emotional learning, and leadership development since its founding in 1993, and currently in our MS50 community school and partnerships in various neighborhood schools. Our major focus of El Puente's holistic approach to address the inequities caused by gentrification in our communities have been the support of our community artists, artisans, and cultural workers of color through a network we call Cadre. We provide technical assistance, teaching, and project opportunities in our programs, performance and rehearsal space, and support for individual and collaborative projects, as well as access to our broad network of community partners and organizations. So my vision for the next 30 years is an amplification of the powerful examples of community-driven solutions for resilience and equitable sustainability that emerged during the global crisis and that we at El Puente have honed and practiced in our own 40-year legacy. Specifically, I envision a city where first and foremost policies and systems are driven by community values that promote dignity, respect, justice, safety, and compassion for all people, and affirms their right to self-determination. I envision a city of thriving, diverse communities that are sustained by deeply rooted community-led infrastructures, composed of dynamic networks of arts and cultural organizations, schools, community development centers, social service and resource agencies, faith-based organizations, local businesses, health and wellness centers, mutual aid, as well as empowered residents and responsible local officials that serve as the bedrock for equitable development and sustainability. Community-rooted and led cultural organizations are critical members of this thriving ecosystem of community cultural districts that serve as vibrant hubs for inclusive, creative education, visioning, planning, implementation, and the assessment of revitalization plans through ongoing arts and cultural engagement and organizing at the community level. I envision local community artists being hired and paid as essential partners, facilitators, and most importantly, leaders, contributing their expertise, artistic mastery, and innovative thinking to address historical inequities and impacts of environmental justice, educational equity, green open spaces, food insecurity, homelessness, and community safety. They would also be full partners in the development of a network of neighborhood community schools, working with teachers, administrators, parents, students, and community partners to promote a model of schools as community institutions rather than institutions in a community. I envision schools that would reflect in their school culture, curriculum, and practice and policies the vision, values, rich histories, heritage, languages, and contributions of their diverse families, students, and communities they are part of. I envision artists commissioned to design public works and events that would contribute to local community economic vibrancy, as well as powerful communal venues, nurturing a deep sense of community inclusion, belonging, and ownership. But above all, I envision artists being paid livable wages to support their artistic mastery and creative contributions, commiserate with their experience and level of mastery, with comprehensive worker benefits and protection. And finally, I envision these community networks and cultural districts receiving multi-year funding in the form of, for example, block grants from the public and private sector, and used in utilizing public artist employment models like the WPA, the CEDA Artist Project in the late 70s, and the current CRNY, Creatives Rebuild New York initiative that Puente is fortunate to be part of. New funding models that promote greater access, autonomy, and equity, both from the public and private sector, would center and uplift historically and perpetually oppressed peoples, and assure the growth and longevity of community-led arts and cultural organizations, specifically those led by and supporting marginalized communities, our low-income, BIPOC, queer, immigrant, and all other communities. In my vision for arts education, I see all of this happening in dynamic and sustainable ways. And so that is my Arts Education 2053 vision in the context of thriving, safe, and just communities for all. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion to follow.
Fantastic. May it all be. That's really great. And I know that they're looking at the chat. A number of the participants here are from community-based cultural organizations. And so I know a lot of what you were speaking about, finding community-based solutions, is really resonating with them. So I'd like to now pass the mic to Michael Wiggins. Michael, could you please share with us a bit about your work and what you would like to see as a vision for arts education in the next 30 years?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Michael Wiggins. I'm an administrator. I'm the director of education and community relations here at Little Island, which is a public park on the west side of Manhattan. We have a sole funder, but we are a not-for-profit. But our situation is a little bit different. I've been listening, and so it's really changed how I was going to answer the question in some way. But I think I'll stick to my guns. I think that, well, the work that I do is about helping people find themselves realized in the art. So I think really the work that I'm interested in manifesting revolves around the concept of transformation. So that as somebody enters the work, they're changed. They get to choose in which direction they're moving, and they have a helper. And so we help people touch an artistic experience. So art, nature, and community is really what I'm interested in right now. My book is called The Teaching Artist Sutras, and I've worked with a lot of people and been involved in the Roundtable since, well, I guess early 90s, right? I look back, 1993, Whitney Houston was #1 with I Will Always Love You. And Bill Clinton was president. I was much younger. I think that there's no way for me to dream anymore about a future. I think when you're thinking about the future, you're talking about the past, because it's impossible for us to envision anything without our, accessing memory. And then we create patterns based on what we already know. So the future will look very different from what I am capable of envisioning. Young people will create it, and they will be utilizing vehicles that older people, I'll be close to death probably, are closer, a lot closer, have created for them. So I'm not sure if they'll be able to drive the car that we've left for them, or use the vehicle for the purposes that will be necessary then, because the world will have changed. I think the themes that we've been, that were articulated here are the ones that will continue. Chaos and uncertainty are going to bedevil us, I think, in the future, because there are agents of chaos who would like them to. There are those who are not even in agreement about basic things about where we're headed. So we're going to have to be constantly involved in the interscene warfare that we're involved in now, just to make sure that we are even able to have a decent conversation. We have to confront irrationality every day, right? So those things are going to continue, and I think probably get worse at least within the short term. So I think that envisioning a future around uncertainty means that a lot of the work will be very similar, just as it is today. There's nothing radically different about what a lot of people and practitioners in our space are doing now versus what they were doing then. I think that there are some things that are heartening and amazing, like El Puente. I envision that El Puente will still be there, being a role model and a leader and a shining light, doing this kind of work. I wish that, and I will manifest that. I hope you agree with me. Because those are the things that actually have made huge impact and long-lasting impact on thousands of individuals. And they are now all over the world doing work. So that's where it's at. So if we go to a vision about what we have to do, we have to support institutions like El Puente. We have to look at them as the anchors for everything, the anchors for human experience, for the kind of society we want to live in. So the Laundromat Project, Full Color, organizations that talk that talk are the ones in which we as practitioners should invest in. We should not look for the next cool thing, because that is what I think the future is about. The future is about co-opting the work that we do and marketing it and turning it into something. It is happening now. You see it already. It starts with Daniel Pink talking about creativity. It starts with it turning into coolness. It starts with things like, rich and entrepreneurs, startup people looking at the work that we do and trying to box it. So you see things like cards, facilitation cards, decks of cards that will help you facilitate an experience. Everybody wants what we have, and they know that it's worth money. We do this work because we care. We do this work because we know that it transforms the world. We do this work because we're artists, and that's what artists do. They will take our work, as they have done, and they're going to put it into the metaverse or whatever. They're going to monetize it and co-opt it. And they're going to continue to do that. And they will co-opt us as well, because we need to make a living. So I think that there will be a dissipation of the field, right? In the future, there will be more. There are infinite varieties of places that this work can live, but there will be very smart people who are going to be taking some of the things that we do that are thrilling, and they're going to box them for sale, and we'll be left out of that game. And the work will then, of course, be cheapened and degraded, because it will be, it's fully in a capitalist structure. So what I think the way for us to confront that, again, is to always be parsing the real from the fake, the authentic from the stuff that's just feel good. And I think we have to do what a young woman whose name I don't know, because it was just a random thing that I saw on Instagram one time, said, well, the reason the stuff isn't working is because no one's willing to sacrifice. We are going to have to sacrifice something. I'm not sure what it is. The context will determine. But if we want to have real change in the world, if we want to have real impact, never forget that New York State spends about $34 billion on public education. And I would look at you in the eyes right now and ask you if you think it's working, if you think that is a good use of $34 billion. The answer unequivocally is no. So it's not about money. It's about something else. We know it. We will have to spend some time in the chaos boiling that down to a syrup, because we're going to have more competition. That's what I think the future is about. And that is what I think we have to get ready for.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Well, on that note, I think I'd like to talk a bit about culture wars that are happening. And I think this sort of fits a little bit with what you've been talking about, Michael. So this has really been front of mind for me. my work with Teachers and Writers Collaborative is literary arts education. And so it's really distressing to hear about the book banning and the censorship that's happening in other parts of the country. And it's really all stemming from institutional racism, right? So thinking about those cultural wars, do you see, has it been affecting your work at all? And I guess my other big question around it is, do you think that arts education can play a role in moving the needle on those? And so, Michael, since you have just expressed so much, I'd like to ask you what you think about that first.
Yeah, our work is everything, which is why it's so powerful and why it's not valued. It is women's work, obviously, right? And we define women's work broadly. And I'm being a little facetious, but everything that's women's work is real. Everything that's women's work that's called women's work, when we talk about that, everything that is human, is fully human, right? And so this is women's work, which means that it is incredibly powerful and is not fit for a capitalist system, which means most people working in this business are struggling to make a living, right? So yes, the work that we do is the only way to confront the things, right, that you have named. And I won't even speak them out. Everybody knows, I just call that the agents of chaos. Our work is the stuff that can confront that most specifically. It can confront it in an individual context. It can confront it in a community context. It requires multiple interventions and multiple spaces to be active and healthy. Like El Puente is one place that you need in a community. It's like a third space. It's not your school. It's not your house. It's not your church. It's another space, an outside space. But we need other places in which people can access art and touch these kind of processes. So what we really want is to go back to a learning society defined by things that we would call women's work, things that are fully human. Those things will, as you raise children up, right? There's going to be a time period where it is impossible for us to put this into the bodies of adults. We're talking about the future, so we're talking about the youth. We're talking about practitioners now really deciding what is real, really buckling down, making sacrifice and say, I'm only going to offer things that are real to confront that. If we do that, then we will win. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Francis, I know that your work, you talk about weaving arts through everything that the students are doing and using that as a tool for making social change. Can you speak to this idea of how arts can really help move the needle in these culture wars?
Yeah, I think, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank Michael for all the declarations that he's putting out in the universe with regard to our next 40 years, right? I think it's really important at this moment in time to recognize that we are in a, and we've heard this over and over, really in a struggle for our souls. At the end of the day, this is really about our moral compass and how askewed it has all become and really perverted. I mean, and I think in really looking at this, I think we and I become even more firmly rooted in my conviction that the work that we do as artists and artisans and cultural workers, and the spaces that we create, sacred spaces where we invite young people and community to bring their hearts and their souls, to be vulnerable, in the trust that we are all and will be there to support each other, to process trauma, the generational historical trauma that we carry within our bodies and in our souls and in our hearts, but also to create a process of healing so that we can together start to envision what it is that we want and that we have a right to in terms of a world and a community that will not only see us, but support us and empower us. That is a powerful, powerful message for our young people right now. And what is also powerful is their the commitment that we make, and I think we make as artists, but we also make as people who work with young people, to walk the journey with them, and that we see them in the fullness of their humanity. And we also support them in manifesting that fullness in the most creative and beautiful and powerful ways. I think what we're looking at and what will turn the needle is the space of power and passion and purpose that we nurture with and for our young people, so that they can take the lead and they can really, really enact sustainable change in the future. They have that within them. All they need is the space to really manifest it.
Yes, absolutely. And Summer, I'd love to turn to you, because to me, this idea of creating this space for young people that is both responsive to them and then sort of opening roads for them, it reminds me of your vision for activated learning. And so I'd love to hear you speak to that a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's really all about that, art creates empathy, that connection, where you could, really share your own story and hear other people's. And so I'm a millennial, and the internet has been evolving continuously throughout my childhood, my youth, my adulthood, and every generation has had its like major platform for people to share story, even in some small way. When you could code your MySpace and your Zanga to be the color you wanted, to play the music you wanted, it was because you wanted to be seen, right? And now there are still lots of barriers to technology and internet and, all of these sorts of things for Black and Brown and other marginalized folks. But the access to being able to share your individual story and potentially share it with millions of people in the world is like the lowest barrier of access, maybe in history, right? And you're seeing on TikTok, people are discovering things that maybe they just wouldn't realize unless they were on TikTok. So like, I didn't know I had wavy hair until TikTok. And then someone was like, what if you tried this? And then I like just changed my shampoo. And then I found out that my hair on my head was different from what I thought it was. I'm learning something new about myself by learning from others. There are people who are sharing their ADHD or their bipolar or their autism experiences from their own mouths. I'm not hearing it from a teacher saying, oh, well, he needs this. I'm not hearing it in an educational context. It's a life context. Having that access to the fullness of experience is what I think is going to keep art alive, because the way we create art and share art may change, but we'll always be sharing our story.
Well, speaking about technology and keeping arts alive, I saw someone in the chat mention, had an alarm around AI. So I'd like to just briefly talk about that and to what extent, as teaching artists, should we be thinking about incorporating new technology like AI into our teaching practice? And so, Summer, you started down this path. I'd like to pass it back to you to continue.
As a primarily theater artist, it's kind of terrifying to think about how AI would be used in my field, because, would we be making visuals of bodies that don't exist and scripts from thoughts that were never thought? And there's possibility there. I already know there's people who are using AI to generate scripts and then present them with the context that they are artificial intelligence and culled from, all human intelligence. And then there's some people who are just using it as a way to get started, as a way to brainstorm. And I think that we will never truly replace human creativity, but it will certainly, like Michael was talking about, like they're going to box it up and sell it. And I was like, they will like they'll find a way to do it, or rebrand it or water it down. So it could make it very difficult I used to be a journalist, and that field has evolved a lot. But I remember just a long time ago, I was like, oh, this is not going down the right path. And sure enough, like there's tons of articles right now that are made by not people. I'd like to think that wouldn't happen to theater. Unfortunately, it's where it's really touching is visual art. So I feel like we really need to think about, because in function, when I'm a company and I just want to put something on my wall, I don't care. Like if a person made it, right? Like I just want it to look good enough to be on my wall. And unfortunately, as artists, we don't see it that way. But companies, they just want something on their wall so it's not plain. So I would really like to shine a light on our visual arts creators and educators, because they are, I think, the highest risk of losing to AI.
Michael, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, thinking about also public programming and as well. I mean, it seems to me
you can't fight technology, especially if it's fun to use. You can't. You'll never beat it. Young people will be on their phones and using technology 24/7. I think I read a study that said for every minute that they are allowed to do it, they will do it. And it has changed the way we think. It changes the way you actually read stuff. All of that stuff is coming. I have no idea what it will look like. Of course, I'm an old man. It will be very far away from me. I don't know what the top 40 songs are today. So how could I understand how technology will impact in reality, 30 years from now? I do know, however, that it is a tool. And so there's someone out there who is good at it and is going to utilize it. And we should not be afraid of it. We can't be afraid of change. We can't be afraid of that technology. We have to, in fact, adopt some of and I think people already are doing this. This is what Summers has really brilliantly pointed out, that the barriers to access have dropped, right? You can reach millions of people. So that power absolutely is going to be warped in some way, but it's also going to be used by someone who is listening to, on this thing right now, is participating in this experience right now, for good. I think that it reminds me of hip hop education, in which we, classically educated people will say, well, there's no validity to that form at all. And of course, that's hooey. You dive into that form and it's got everything that you need to grow and change, right? So this is the same kind of thing. We just need an expert to look at it who has our value system, because culture and value, that will trump that strategy. That's what we were talking about, the moral compass. Though that is what is necessary, the ethics contained in the body of the artist will look at technology and find some way to make it useful and good and advance the causes that we all care about. On the other hand, the agents of chaos and evil, let's name it, will also be doing their job with the same stuff. So
may the voices of good be louder than the voices of evil.
That is the promise. That is the promise of the universe. So don't worry.
Francis, I'd love to turn to you to talk about the pandemic, what we've learned post-pandemic, what's the new reality for arts and education for us now?
I think what we learned were very simple but profound lessons on the primacy and the sacredness of community and connection. What is truly and deeply important to us is the people that we love and the people that we love and the people that love us. I think the notion of a caring and loving and compassionate world is something that was so visceral to us during the pandemic, when we lost that and we were isolated. And I think we need to come back into that moment. We need to continue to remember and manifest what that moment propelled us to do, and particularly artists. And we saw it over and over again. Artists who created spaces from their balconies and in open spaces and on Zoom. Artists at Puente that created, virtual bilingual healing circles with drums and instruments and singing and dancing with young people and their families. There was something about that, and I think there's something about what and how, even in the isolation of people's homes, they went deep within themselves and found their creative souls, right? And all of a sudden they became artists and they became cooks, and these kinds of things that nurtured the inner life. What I always, talk about, what I talk about often is, really nurturing an affair with one's soul, right? I think this is, and even in context of this conversation about AI, right? I think this is the thing that we really have to hold on to. And this is what needs to drive us as we think about those spaces, those places, whether they're in schools, whether they're in community-based organizations, whether they're in communities at large, that nurture those values and that urgency around how and in which way we recognize and see each other in our full humanity, and how we express that individually and collectively in powerful, creative ways.
That's really beautifully said. And I really appreciate that, because I personally feel that community is so essential to our survival and connection with each other. Summer, as a teaching artist, I'd love to hear what you've experienced and what you experience now as this new reality post-pandemic.
So the first thing I thought about was kind of how, just anyone who's been alive since 2020 was affected, right, by the pandemic. And the students at so many different grade levels, because they were at different points in their development of their identity and their social emotional skills, they were all affected in a different way. And I'm really interested to see how it evolves. For pre-K and K, we're seeing a lot of children who are less verbal because they're not exposed to as many people. Like they spent 3 years of their life in their house and not really seeing nearly as many people as maybe older students did when they were that age. I'm seeing, like, in the middle grades, some of the SEL skills are super far ahead and some of them are very behind, right? Depending on what kind of household you live in, your self-regulation and when you're de-escalating yourself, your skills may be different if in your house, you're treated a certain way and you're not exposed to other forms of discipline or reinforcement or support other than your parents. And to now be under a teacher who may see the world in a totally different way and operate in a totally different way for a lot of these students is like sometimes trauma inducing if it's a teacher who's not supportive of them. But I also see that they are being more eager to advocate for themselves, to advocate for others. They're very aware of their surroundings and very hungry for connection. And these are all observations. I don't have, I only know what I've seen on the planet. And even if I look back in history, it's very hard to see how these patterns may repeat in our new age with this technology, with the AI. But I'm so curious to see what happens with these students and where they are emotionally. Their learning is also different. Everything that we expected for these students before the pandemic is kind of an unreasonable expectation. Like, we're having like state testing and stuff. Testing for what? Like, how much education do you think they had? Like, you're expecting them to be at this level. Like, how would they be at that level when they've missed so much school? And it's really unrealistic, but humans have tended to do that. We consistently base our expectations for whatever age based on the generation before. And I think when we were talking before, I think with Asari and Dr. Lucerna, we were talking about, at some point your lifespan was 45 years and it was totally normal to get married at 12. That's different now. Life changes. Things are completely different. And these students are going to have different lives. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, in terms of the programming, the arts programming that happens at Little Island, have you seen a shift resulting from the pandemic? Do you feel like you're doing things differently there now?
Oh, we were very lucky. I think we were an answer for a lot of people because we opened during the pandemic. We were one of the few places that was open. I remember people coming and being very emotional. It was the first time that they'd seen each other outdoors, being able to experience art. Artists who got to perform on the island were overwhelmed with emotion because it had been so long, and so that was wonderful. I think coming out of the pandemic, my noticings are that we've been lied to about so many things. I think what I noticed is that their money is a fiction. Absolutely. Billions of dollars available immediately when we need it, right? Although they're always telling us there's not enough. When they needed to move money around, they voila, suddenly we can. I think that the pandemic again shows us that so much of what we have agreed on as reality is all just fake, and should be reconsidered. Our preferences. Somebody's preferences, obviously not mine. But we have power, and knowing that is our greatest power. And our mission and our values, our investment in youth, which is not going to stop. I think that I've been doing this for at least 25 years, right? So there's a commitment from the field in general. There's a type of person who is involved in this work. And this is the thing that I think is most salient, is that we live on the eastern coast of the United States of America at this time. Our country is changing. We're talking about the field, but the field will be fractured, just as our country is fractured. And so there are young people who are living in this city who will benefit from this conversation. There are young people who are living in Arkansas or name a state, and they will not. Just as women are now defending basic rights in places, there are young people who are not going to be able to access the kind of beautiful work that we are able to bring them. And when we figure out how to use technology, et cetera, to bring it to them in new ways, they will also not be able to access that. They'll get to pay for it, I'm sure, in a different way, but they won't be able to access the places that are blue, the places that are progressive, the places that care. These are the places in which the work is going to be innovative and grow. Those other places are going to, unless you want to go and intervene.
Yeah, it's true. The access is looking really unequal, but I am hopeful that, as Summer was talking about earlier, that technology allows people who are in places where there wouldn't be access to the kind of programming that they might experience here to get that. And I think it's bringing us all closer together in ways that we can't even imagine. Well, at least I can't imagine. So we're going to transition to Q&A in a little bit, but before we go there, one of the topics that came up as we were sort of preparing for this conversation was school shootings, which have unfortunately become sort of a new reality for us. And as teaching artists, maybe artists in residence are going into schools, they're suddenly encountering active shooter drills, and they're encountering the anxiety experienced by the students. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how this impacts our work of arts education. And what does safety mean really for students on the community level, on the individual level? Summer, could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely seen my students be impacted by it. I have a few times had lessons interrupted by active shooter drills or notices, and these students are really frightened and really scared. I think, when you do not teach and you do not have children, you can turn on the news and be horrified at the latest school shooting, but it's not as visceral. To see like 30 quaking school children in front of you trying to hide, thinking that they're going to be shot, it makes it just incredibly real. And I think for most of this was not a fear that we really had. And for them, it is very real and very grounded. As a teaching artist, it's definitely entered my mind on tough days where no teachers are answering my emails and they reschedule stuff, and it's a gig that doesn't pay that well, and I don't have health insurance, and a school shooting happens that day, and I'm like, is it worth it that I'm doing this right now, that I'm like going over there? And it makes the hard days so much harder and so much scarier. And on the great days, I love my job, but I also think, I could be having the best day at work, and this could happen while I'm having the best day at work. And, at this point, I was married and I have a stepson, and I'm still his mother, but I definitely have thought, like, when I was together with my ex, like, it was a possibility that I would be at work and something would happen and no one could pick up our kid, or something could happen to our kid at school. And it's very terrifying, and it's very real, whether you're an educator or you're a parent. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the solution is pretty obvious. So it's like, we don't have to theorize, what could we possibly do? How could we solve this problem? The solution is obvious. It's the barrier is getting folks to act on that solution. Yeah.
I think in context of us being arts educators, just continuing to create the spaces where students feel safe, I think is vital.
Well, I am very disturbed by the school shootings. It's very disturbing. However, Black people live in this country with a level of violence that is persistent, and nobody was crying about that. So you're right, there was no big special about that on ABC, or whatever. Jake Tapper didn't do a special on the fact that, when I was 12, a cop who grabbed me in my front yard, right? And that my fear was about cops. I mean, no one talks about the fact that we have police officers with guns in our school, like it's normal. Mm-hmm. No one talks about the fact that we arrest children. Like, and these are the things that are right. And the violence that is perpetrated on America's youth is not just about school shootings. And we're not going to win that battle, right? We haven't won. They would like more guns, but we can still confront violence. We should point it out. We should not be. I don't think we should be caught up in the news cycle. Absolutely. It's important that we should shout as much as we can about school shootings, and there are solutions for it, and we should be shout. But on the other hand, let us not lose sight of the fact that if you're a Black kid in this country, you are under threat of violence every day of every minute of your life. And who is doing stuff about that? And why are the cops still in the schools?
Yep. And I think you're absolutely right, Michael. And I think, we live in communities, and particularly the communities that we're in. I mean, where every single day we live with the fear. We live the fear for our children. Our children live with the fear of their own lives. Being taken from violence that's almost embedded now in the culture of our communities. I think it behooves us to really, to be more vigilant and more committed to going back to this idea of what is the infrastructure, what is the safety net in communities, and where and how community people, community folks, families, and others are empowered to really start to think about solutions that really create this kind of culture of safety for our young people, and that they themselves are involved in. I think looking at community infrastructures once again, and funding and supporting community organizations, agencies, to work together to really create, again, ways that we can, create community-led safety that's really, again, based on principles and values that we are reiterating and reaffirming and are manifesting in all of the organizations and in all of the places in the community where our children live, but where we live. And I think, I think it goes back to much more of a thinking around how and in which way we support community solutions and community institutions that create that kind of safety, and then create the kind of space for young people and community to process their trauma, deep trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I appreciate you pivoting to thinking about what's the solution, because I'd like to end this part of the conversation before we go to Q&A, just with a quick thought about what are the policies that need to happen now to be able to create the future that we want. And so, yeah, I'd love to turn it back to you, Francis, because you had so many great ideas about the kind of funding changes that need to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I think we need to really think about funding. You know, the way in which funding is thought about. I think the idea of where funding goes. I think the idea of funding going to agencies and government, government agencies, I think is something we really need to revisit, and really we need to kind of mobilize, as I know a lot of cultural communities of color are. We're part of networks that are really starting to say, and we have partners in the private, foundations that are saying, yeah, they are willing to invest in those kinds of models that give communities, organizations of color, led by people of color, to start to not only just receive funding, but manage the funding. The ways in which we can have control of monies and resources that will then be applied to solutions and strategies and mitigations that we ourselves as a community are developing that address directly those lived experiences and those needs that we have. And young people need to be at the table with that. And so I think that, I think there's got to be a whole other thinking about how and in which way policy drives funding. And policy needs to be really focused and really committed to self-determination, the self-determination of people in a community. And that's really what it is. And we need to be vigilant about a people's movement to continue to press and press and press for that.
Amen. Dr. Lucerna, I'm sorry to jump in. Dr. Lucerna's vision is the future. You understand? Young woman co-founded an organization. That is the future. What they are doing is the future that will work. Our tax dollars being spent by people who are living in the community. They have a community school. Understand, if we are depending on private people to fund our dream, they are only going to fund it to the extent that it does not ask them to sacrifice anything. We pay taxes. It is our job to determine how that stuff is spent. We should demand it. So the people who founded El Puente are speaking to the future. All energy should go into activities like that. They have created and seeded the field with thousands of people who understand how the world should look. And that is how you win.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, and especially with young people, to really be very clear that they understand that, systemic racism is intentional. The ways in which they are experiencing their lived experience in racist institutions is intentional. And that the ways in which funding that supports that institution is really about maintaining that status quo. And so I think, we're talking real here, and this is what it's about. But young people need to know that they have the power to go ahead and change that, and to really, again, mobilize and organize to change that. Communities have the power to do that. And we've seen it over and over and over again. I think we are just in a time when, again, we just need to really be able to say that to each other and then to move. And I think that that's really what it's about, because for all that is happening, that at this moment in this critical point where, it seems doom and gloom, it really isn't. This is the moment when possibility is open, wide open, for us to really walk through and really take over.
I love it. I love it. So I'd love to now go to some questions that have come in. And I'll try to translate the questions or present them as clearly as possible. So one of them is, to the point about paying artists living wages, how do we do that for administrators? For people who are burned out and overworked and not always actively supported by arts organizations where education is a secondary focus, how do we support the financial and SEL needs of our own staff? So this is thinking about sort of the financial viability of working in arts education. And I'll sort of open it up to anyone who has thoughts on that.
You can't do it piecemeal.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not religious, but I know the Bible because I was raised in it. And Jesus said, for some reason, Jesus said, the poor will always be with us. Why did he say that? Because we're people. And this is how human society is set up. So you can't move that one little piece. You cannot raise teaching artists' salaries. You cannot raise these salaries of things that's not valued in this culture. It's not valued. The money's not there. It's not going to happen. You either have to do less, or everybody has to sacrifice, or you have to change the whole society bit by bit. So again, I go back to the idea of investing. The human lifespan is too short for us to learn and grow and do all the things we want to do in one body, right? But you look at an institution like El Puente, they have learned and grown. They're now doing things that they did not do 40 years ago. But if you keep looking at that and keep investing in that kind of thing, it starts to grow. So now community school, then maybe there's housing. Maybe you start to do housing. Maybe you start to become maybe you start to combine organizations, or maybe you just have, you know, you're working with a developer, you've got the community school, you've got the arts organization. We have to get smarter in terms of administration in order to do what you're talking about. We have to start to partner more, collaborate more, have more vision, and develop. We have to start borrowing the processes more from the world of business, and we have to stop letting them do half the job because we're children or something. You know, we need them to blah, blah, blah. We need to start marshaling our resources so that we're the decision makers and we can take action on our own.
Yeah, I think, you know, burnout is real. And it's also, you know, again, because there is an intentionality behind that. Nonprofits, by and large, we just live from check to check, from, you know, grant to grant. We are at the mercy of, you know, government, you know, procurement processes and systems that don't even pay us for the work that we do. And I think, you know, I think we do need to think out the box. We do need to think about how and in which way our organizations and the way we structure our organizations are much more nimble and flexible and fluid. And I think, you know, to the point that Michael's making about, you know, powerful partnerships that are predicated on mutual investment, right? And mutual investment in all of us, you know, rising so that we can all thrive, you know. And I think that's a shift of a mindset that is inherent to us in terms of who we are as people and cultural workers, but in terms of what we have and every day struggle with in terms of institutional, systemic, you know, systems. We are constantly at odds to that. And I think it does take a real kind of switch, a flip of the mindset right now in terms of how and which way we think about collective self-help among our organizations. Yeah.
I mean, I think to a certain extent it's a systemic issue, right? It's a systemic issue about in the way that we operate. And so the response has to be a systemic response. And, you know, I think, again, I have to give kudos to the work of the Roundtable that's doing all kinds of advocacy to try to, you know, make things better for all of us in the field. So I have a question here that's related to working in the schools. How do we as arts educators balance wanting to transform schools and education, which we know need to change, while also not contributing to the climate of censorship and devaluing and dismantling of public education that is happening all around the country? So I guess it's how do we go into classrooms without compromise? And Summer, I'd like to get your take on this because I think that your vision really spoke to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about arts education, but you know, these these students are experiencing education as a whole person. And like we've been saying over and over, this is a community thing. It's a systemic thing. So I don't know. I feel like we need to transform education kind of at every level, not just in how it affects the arts. And what is easiest for us is advocating for arts, and that's where they'll listen to us. But like, I want to reinvent how we're approaching math, how we're approaching science, how we're approaching every single thing that those students are doing. I'm also becoming more and more curious about how we support parents. And the thing is, right, how we support the people who are students today is how we're supporting the parents of the future. Because if they stay in that neighborhood, or whether they do or not, they're going to have kids. And whether or not they're in a position to support those students, whether or not they had a positive experience with education, is going to affect the education of their children. And we're investing in a multi-generational community, kind of multi-layered unit. It's not just about the main education. As far as like censorship and the devaluing and dismantling of public education, I think that a lot of it is education is under-resourced at all levels. I think that people are holding that accountable. I think people are pointing out the inequity between different schools based on how they are supported, if they're supported by income tax, and things like, predatory zoning and gentrification are only deepening those gaps. And those are things that exist outside of the education realm, but directly affect it. So we need to be active in all avenues of lobbying to or advocating for change. It has to be a big picture thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of questions and we don't have a lot of time left for Q&A. So I'm just going to apologize in advance for not being able to get to everyone's question. But I think this next question is a really relevant one. We've heard about a number of social issues and how arts education creates tools for change. What about the enormous changes coming on in our climate over the next 30 years? How will arts education help people cope with our planet changing so drastically?
Have you read, there's a book of poetry called The Octopus Museum. It's a lovely book of poetry. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. I think it's Maura Shaughnessy. Anyways, it is one of the ways that we will have to deal with it is by storytelling, because people will be removed from there. They will be displaced. There will be trauma. And so artists will have to go into communities and help people process that, and they'll process it through art. So stories will be told and shared, and feelings will be expressed through art. That's one way. And that is, of course, I think we can go on, but that's the most important way. We will do our job. That is our job. That is what we do now.
I think artists and arts education, I think, can be at the forefront of real mitigation. And I think, I think the ways in which artists and art can engage people in thinking out of the box and thinking of ways and creative ways and innovative ways to really address the issue of climate change and environmental justice in their communities, as well as globally, I think, is the frontier for arts education. I mean, we see a lot of it starting to happen, but I think it really needs to be almost a focus right now in terms of the fact that we understand that climate change every single day. We see what's happening in this country, and with tornadoes and extreme snow and rains and fires. I mean, it is happening, and it's happening in the most aggressive and ferocious and vicious and violent way. And I think, again, really putting that in its place is creating more stress, more trauma, and putting it in a way that empowers particularly our young people to really start to think proactively and act proactively. I think is really within the realm of what is the future for arts education, using technology and using, all of the tools available, to really kind of, create these really unthought of right now, right? Solutions, but really empowering people to understand that, and young people particularly, that they have the power to do that.
Yeah.
And the imagination.
Summer, did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, and I think Dr. Lucerna was getting right to the, like, at the end, some of the things that I wanted to say. I think that the way arts can really help is by teaching critical thinking, abstract thinking, getting them to change. A lot of my vision was talking about dismantling the boxed in ways we teach our students to think, because it's so unoriginal, it's so unhelpful. And honestly, that is why AI is such a threat. Like, how do we get ourselves to the point where our human creativity and innovation and like determination to survive is stronger than whatever computer can try to do. And it's those kind of minds that will solve the problems, like everything that we discussed, right? Like undersupported communities and administrators and the environment, school shootings. Like, we don't have the answers right now, the people here on this call at April 3rd, 2023, but I bet someone in a classroom right now, someone who is doodling on their desk and getting yelled at for carving into the wood or the plastic or whatever it is going to solve the problem.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge some of the things that came up in the chat that we are not going to be able to get to. One was a question about exactly how do we pool more funds together as organizations. And there was also an interesting question that had to do with thinking about sort of longitudinal studies. How do we measure the impact of arts education in the long term? And I think, both of those topics could be their own separate panel, but there's just so much ground that we could be covering. I'd like to just take the last few minutes to give everybody a chance to give their final thoughts on this topic, on the topic of the future of arts education. And hopefully in a forward-thinking, there's a lot of challenges, but as we've been saying, there also seem to be a lot of opportunities. So let's just go round robin, and I'd like everybody to just share your final thoughts. Michael?
I think the field is vast, and so describing it is impossible. The ways the work can manifest are infinite, and there are so many talented and smart people who will come up with new ways to bring the work into the world. I think the only real message is, in this time, I think it is really important for us to acknowledge that as a trained artist, as an artist, you have so much power. Every time you interact with another human being, there's the potential, the possibility for you to make the world a better place. And that the war that we're involved in, the battle that we're involved in is going to be on an individual level. And it's okay. I'm with the doctor. It is darkest before the dawn. It looks dark, but there is opportunity here, as you say, to change. And we should focus on the work that has brought us to this spot. The pathways that brought us here are the same pathways we should choose. I want well-worn paths. The future is the past, because we are right. Art is the answer, no matter the question.
Art is the answer. I think
Cassie Thornton said that. Cassie Thornton said that. She's amazing.
Art is the answer. And Summer, your last thoughts?
I think it really just comes down to human connection, which Michael definitely alluded to. Art for us is everything, but it's also really just our vehicle to being our most human selves and our vehicle to connecting to what makes everyone else themselves. And I think if we focus on that, I think there's no way to deny that that is what is critically important here. And I'm hoping that people will invest money in supporting people's real selves, that people will invest time, that we will create communities that support each other, and that we create a new generation of students who can think beyond what we can think of today.
Yes, investing in what, investing in, if if we value this, when I say we, I'm really talking about those who really have the ability to invest and meaningfully move things, forward on a large scale. If you value arts education, invest in it. Thank you. And finally, Frances, last thoughts.
Well, I feel that we are in a moment of great possibility and great hope. And I think what keeps coming up for me is this idea of imagination. And I think we need to be vigilant about our power to imagine and really understand that exercising our power and our right to imagine is the revolution,
Thank you. That was beautifully stated and a wonderful note to end this conversation. You all have been such wonderful, wonderful people to speak with on this topic. I really appreciate all of the ideas, and I really am walking away from this conversation, I feel, with a lot of inspiration and hope for the future. And I hope that those who have been listening in feel the same way. I'd now like to turn to Kimberly Olson to offer some closing remarks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Asari, and thank you to our incredible panelists. I hope you're able to see sort of that fast and furious love coming through the chat. A huge thank you to Summer, to Frances, to Michael for joining us today, sharing your wisdom, help really kick off not only our conference, but truly kick off the next 30 years of the Roundtable and our work, that the work continues. We're so grateful to be here learning from all of you today. And a thank you to everybody that's joined us for this first session. We hope you'll continue to learn with us, to celebrate with us over the next 2 weeks, with this first week being our virtual face-to-face sessions, along with Monday, April 10th. And then next week, we will be live in person, 2 days, almost 30 sessions at Riverside Church on April 12th and 13th. But we hope you'll join us tomorrow, April 4th. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we're going to be having Reimagining Cultural Workforce Development, led by Eliza Greenberg and Ariel Lever from the Museum Arts and Cultural Access Consortium, MAC. And then at 4 p.m., we'll be having a workshop called Respect, Hip Hop Education Through Celebration, led by the incredible Shakia Purple Haze Norris, also a Roundtable board member. We hope to see you there. Kinsey, I'm sure, is about to paste that. Oh, she's the best. Paste the link to it in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for spending your time with us at the Roundtable. And I hope you have a lovely Monday evening. We will see you again soon tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy your evening. Goodbye, all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It's been really an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.